Over the past 2 months, I've come to dread the moment my eyes drift shut, because that's when the nightmare returns. Every single night, the same dream. At first I wasn't worried, reasoning that it was just one weird event in my sleep, but it kept happening. Then it began growing, little by little, each time pulling me further into its dark scenario. It has reached a point where my daily life is consumed by planning how to avoid it, though I can't possibly stay awake forever. I live alone in a one-story rental on the edge of a small town, and although I moved in eagerly, excited about the peace and quiet, I'm now convinced that something in this house or on this property has latched onto me. The more nights that pass, the more the nightmare warps my perception of reality, like a creeping shadow that extends an inch farther each evening. It doesn't start like a typical dream, with random images or disjointed transitions. Instead, the moment I slip under the surface of sleep, I realize exactly where I am, standing in my own bedroom, but with subtle differences that set me on edge. In the dream, the furniture is arranged the same way, but the walls seem taller, the overhead light dimmer, the corners of the room strangely indefinite. I always check the clock on my nightstand. It reads 12:01, which is not necessarily the time I fell asleep. The digits glow a faint red, though my real clock glows in soft green. From that instant, I know I'm in the dream version of my home, because the clock never changes from 12:01. I walk into the hallway, and that's where the real unease starts. The hallway in my waking life is short, leading straight to the living room. In the dream, it stretches out, curving gently to the left, so I can't see the end. The walls have patches of peeling wallpaper, though my real walls are painted. The overhead fixture is a single flickering bulb. Often I hear a dripping sound from somewhere, a tap or a leaking pipe, but I can never locate its source. The dream me calls out, "Hello?" or "Is anybody here?" though I never recall deciding to speak. It's as if the dream animates me along a script. As I proceed, the hallway leads me past doors that don't exist in waking life. 3 or 4 closed doors on each side. They have tarnished brass handles, each bearing a scratched symbol I can't decipher, a spiral or a faint swirl. The air feels stale, carrying a faint odor of damp wood. Eventually, I reach a final door at the end. It's always partly ajar, letting a sickly yellow glow spill out. The color of that glow intensifies nightly, turning from a pale hue into a deeper, almost musty color. Entering that room used to be enough to make me wake up with a jolt, but not anymore. It now acts as the midpoint of the nightmare, from which something truly wrong crawls out. In that room, the layout is never fully consistent, but a few elements remain the same each night. There's a mirror set against one wall, large and old, with a black iron frame detailed in swirling patterns that resemble roots or vines. The reflection in it is incomplete. My silhouette is there, but the background behind me seems different, like it's capturing another place or time. I might glimpse furniture that isn't in the dream room behind me, or walls bearing an unfamiliar design of cracked plaster. Another feature is a battered trunk in the corner, partially open, from which an unpleasant smell seems to emanate. Sometimes I see an arm resting on the trunk's edge, vanishing when I shift my gaze. Another corner might hold a bookshelf stacked with volumes whose spines bear no titles. Everything suggests that the space is in flux, part relic of the house, part gateway to somewhere else. Then there's the presence. I can't call it a person, though it has a roughly human outline. Each night, I notice it more clearly. It stands by the mirror or near the trunk, as if rummaging or adjusting items within it. The first few times, it didn't even look at me, just seemed busy, muttering quietly. But with each passing night, It acknowledges me more, glances my way, moves closer. The face remains shadowed, but I see the shape of a jaw, maybe a mouth set in a slight grin. It's wearing a ragged garment, colorless under the dim glow. Or maybe the color changes. Hard to be sure. All I know is that each dream, it draws nearer, and I'm able to hear more of its whispered words, which are never in any recognizable language, just a litany that sends a rippling dread up my spine. By the time I wake from this dream, I realize I've broken into a sweat, my breathing unsteady. At first, it took me minutes to gather my bearings. Now it sometimes takes hours, because the dream's sensations linger so strongly that I can't shake the feeling of being watched in my own real hallway. Lights remain on in every room. I've taken to leaving the television on at low volume, hoping the noise wards off whatever tries to creep out of my subconscious. But no matter what I do, the dream recurs. Skipping coffee, playing loud music before bed, or sleeping in different rooms. None of it helps. Last week, I began noticing changes to the actual house. The hallway that leads from my bedroom to the living room feels slightly extended, as if an extra foot or two has been tacked on. When I measured it, the numbers were the same as always, so maybe it's an illusion. Yet the daily experience of walking that hallway makes me do a double take. The overhead fixture flickered one night, something it never did before. A drip began beneath the sink, audible especially late at night. I also discovered a trunk in the attic, eerily similar to the one in the dream, though battered by real dust and time. I tried opening it, but the lid was stuck. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Another complication. My memory is slipping around the edges. I keep forgetting small tasks at work or losing track of days. People who used to chat with me at lunch ask if I'm okay, saying I repeat stories or drift off mid-sentence. I don't recall repeating anything. My boss gave me a concerned talk about my performance, which has never been an issue before. Sleep deprivation certainly can do that, but I sense something else is at work. Sometimes I dream I'm rummaging through that trunk in the nightmare room, pulling out random objects. A cracked photo frame, old letters, a hairbrush. Then I half wake, convinced those objects are on my bed, but the bed is empty, except for my sheets. The next morning I notice scratches or scuff marks on the floor near the attic hatch. No matter how thoroughly I check the house, I find nothing out of place. Yet I recall those dream objects with unsettling clarity. 2 nights ago, the dream escalated. The figure approached me in that dusty room and lifted a mirror shard, holding it up to my face. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in that shard, except it wasn't quite mine. The face was older, maybe by decades, the eyes worn and troubled, like someone who's seen unspeakable things. The figure pressed the shard toward my chest as though offering me a knife. I refused, stepping back, and it hissed something that felt like a warning or a condemnation. Then I woke. This time, a new detail carried over. A faint scratch on my left forearm, as though I'd pressed against a piece of broken glass. In real life, the scratch stung for hours. A small cut that scabbed over by midday. That was the turning point that convinced me the dream was crossing boundaries. I started searching for a spiritual advisor or medium who might help. That's how I found Maribel, a local mystic recommended by a co-worker's friend. She came to my house one afternoon, wearing a gentle smile. She listened carefully as I recounted the dream. Without mocking me, she performed what she called a cleansing ritual in each room, using sage and chanting under her breath. She told me there was a distinct energy in the house's walls, something old that predated my arrival. She advised me not to open the attic trunk if I could help it, saying it might be a focal point for the negative force.
She left an amulet made of twisted wire and crystal in the corner of my bedroom. I was hopeful for the first time in weeks.
That night, I lit the sage bundles again and tried to relax, thinking maybe I'd banished the dream, but it returned in its usual form. However, something changed. The room was no longer silent. I heard a low, chanting echo from behind the other doors, the ones that never existed in my real hallway. The figure in the final room, near the battered trunk, was no longer alone. At least two more silhouettes huddled near it, rummaging through the trunk. As I recognized one silhouette's posture from the day, it matched Maribel's form. Could it be a twisted reflection of the medium who tried to help me? In the dream, she was rummaging in tandem with the original figure, pulling out objects and handing them off. Then they both turned to face me, raising their arms in unison as though summoning me forward. I barely had time to gasp in dream terms before waking up, shaking in my bedroom, the amulet on the floor as if it fell from its place. So that attempt to rid me of the nightmare only made it more elaborate. Maribel insisted she did nothing that could cause such a reaction, but when I described the silhouettes, she became uneasy. She suggested that maybe the house's entity is co-opting any external help, using the dream's malleable structure to incorporate new influences. She apologized profusely, then admitted she might be out of her depth. She recommended a more thorough approach, like a professional exorcist or a complete vacating of the property. I, however, found it excruciatingly hard to find an official exorcist or spiritual authority that would take me seriously. And I worry that if I run from the house, the nightmare might follow. The diaries in the trunk remain in my thoughts. Apparently, I'm not the first occupant to suffer repeated nightmares. The previous occupant, based on a handful of scribbles scrawled on half-rotted pages, wrote about becoming trapped in a house that lengthens nightly. They also mentioned the trunk, describing it as a vessel for old curses. They claimed the trunk had been left by an earlier occupant who practiced some form of mirror magic. The final lines of those diaries trail off mid-sentence, as though the writer either found a solution or vanished before finishing. If they found a solution, I can't see any sign of it. The trunk remains locked, though sometimes at night I think I hear it creak overhead, like a lid shifting on its own. I might have tried to break the trunk open had I not read the diaries. One page specifically warns never to forcibly open it, or else you release the final latch on the reflection crossing. My mind conjures nightmares enough. I dread to think what might be unleashed if I pried that trunk open. Perhaps the entity in my dream wants me to do exactly that, bridging the barrier entirely. So the trunk remains in the attic, a silent menace. Meanwhile, the dream intensifies. The last 2 nights I've hardly gotten any real rest. The dream arrives within minutes of me nodding off. I see the room, the row of incorrect doors, the final door with flickering orange light, and the same battered trunk in that dream room. The figure, or figures, rummaging, whispering. They beckon, calling my name. My real name spoken in resonant echoes that swirl around the room. I sense an approaching climax. The figure in the dream used to keep its face hidden. Now it partially reveals features that match mine, albeit older or more worn. The eyes reflect the color of the overhead lamp, dull orange as though lit by an ember. A creeping suspicion arises that it might be me from some alternate timeline or dimension. Or maybe it's an entity wearing my face. The diaries mention mirror magic, illusions, reality overlap. The presence tries to guide me to the trunk in the dream, as though wanting me to open it. In the real attic, the trunk remains locked. The synergy is terrifying. My dream self might open it there, unleashing something physically here. Or maybe I am supposed to open the trunk in real life to banish the curse. The diaries are too fragmentary to confirm either route. My job is on the verge of letting me go entirely. I missed an entire shift last week after oversleeping from sheer exhaustion. My phone is loaded with anxious texts from coworkers, and my only close friend in town, Kayla, who begs me to leave the house. But I've tried searching for new rentals. Everything is booked, or the deposit is too high. The dream entity seems to be orchestrating events, herding me into a corner. Every day I find small changes. The corners of my rooms appear at odd angles, doorknobs shifting position, or I see fleeting movements in mirrors, my reflection turning an instant too late. It's as if the dream bleeds into the house hour by hour. Last night might have been the biggest escalation so far. I drifted off around 2 a.m., hoping my body's sheer exhaustion would keep the dream short. Instead, the moment I closed my eyes, I found myself not in my room, but in the dream room directly. The battered trunk was open, the figure kneeling by it, rummaging inside for something. Multiple shapes circled behind it, indefinite but human-like. Their heads swayed as if chanting. The figure turned to me with a slow, deliberate motion. It held a reflective surface, perhaps a piece of a large mirror. Within that reflection, I saw the real me lying in bed, eyes squeezed shut, with that same entity leaning over me. So the dream looped back to reality, showing me from the outside. Then it hissed, "We merge soon." I forced myself awake by clenching my hands around the bed frame. This time I physically felt an unseen weight pressing down on me the instant before I opened my eyes. The overhead light flickered violently, then stabilized. I can't keep living in this cycle, waiting for a final confrontation. The diaries mention a final union that leads to disappearance. One occupant wrote, "Once it merges fully with your reflection, you never wake up, yet your body wanders unrecognizable." Another occupant claimed to have glimpsed a relative who died years ago, as if the house can conjure illusions from the occupant's mind. In my case, it's conjuring me, an older, twisted version, like a malevolent reflection wanting a new place. Maybe it's tied to the trunk, or to the hidden mirror rites that some prior occupant performed. At this point, I see two possible paths. Forcibly open the trunk in real life to see if destroying its contents ends the nightmares, or abandon the house entirely, risking the chance the curse follows me. The diary's warnings about opening the trunk remain dire. The occupant who tried it wrote a final line. "I cracked the lock, and something stepped out of the mirror." Then the diary ended. That occupant presumably never escaped. The occupant who fled the house reported the nightmares followed them, though it eventually faded after many months. But they never described the dream reaching the intensity I've experienced. Perhaps once it's gone so far, flight is meaningless. I've spent the last day gathering all the diaries in the attic trunk, the ones I can read, and setting them out in the living room. Their pages mention repeated attempts, exorcisms, salt lines, mirror smashing. None conclusively worked. The occupant from 1972 wrote that the entity thrives on the occupant's fear, growing each time the occupant sleeps. It's a parasite that anchors itself to the house's structure. The occupant must break its chain in the dream itself, or allow it to merge. That occupant apparently tried taking control of the dream, but never documented the result. I suspect they too disappeared. Now my plan is almost as desperate. If I can become lucid in the dream, I might forcibly reject the figure or destroy the battered trunk in that dream room. If it's truly a reflection of the real trunk, maybe that act can sever the link without physically unlocking the trunk upstairs. I have no guarantee. My friend Kayla says I'm flirting with madness, but she can't help me more than offering a couch to crash on, which I've tried. The dream followed me to her place, giving me the same horrifying scenario, except the corridor in the dream ended in a door that looked like Kayla's living room. That proved location doesn't matter. The nightmare is bound to me now. I'm running on minimal rest as I finalize these confessions. The house's real hallway has grown so unfamiliar that each time I step into it, I half expect the dream corridor's flickering bulb. The trunk in the attic rattles faintly at odd times, though maybe it's just my exhausted mind playing tricks. My phone alarms are set for short intervals to keep me from sinking into deep sleep, but eventually, I must succumb. When I do, I intend to find the dream trunk and tear it apart from the inside. Maybe that will banish the figure or push it back behind the mirror. Yet a voice in my head warns that if I fail, this final confrontation might let it fully cross over. The diaries mention an occupant who tried a similar approach, wrote about the only way out is through, and vanished soon after. But there's no alternative. I can't keep living in half sleep, riddled with anxiety, letting the dream presence drip-feed terror into my life. I've typed up every detail here in case I'm gone, or changed in the morning. If you discover me missing or find me altered, you'll know the reason. Maybe you can keep searching for a solution. Or better yet, if you're reading this before stepping into a house with a suspicious trunk or history of nightmares, spare yourself the horror and walk away. Though my eyes ache from staying awake, I'm about to lie down, letting the dream come. My plan: seize control inside that corridor, rush to the final room, confront the battered trunk in the dream. Smash it, burn it, something. If the figure tries to stop me, I'll keep going. The diaries never describe the occupant's success or failure in detail, but I can't accept inaction. Should I lose, the figure with my face might roam free in the real world, wearing my identity while I remain trapped in a perpetual nightmare. The idea chills me beyond words, but I refuse to yield. The time is near midnight. The house is quiet, the hallway light unwavering for once. I've locked the attic, stuffed towels under doors, set every lamp in the house to maximum brightness. None of that truly matters if the dream is inside me. My phone is nearly out of battery, so I'll end this here. If I vanish, let these words stand as proof that a repeating nightmare can become an active, malevolent force. If by some grace I succeed, maybe I'll tear these pages up and never speak of them again. But for now, they remain, a testament to the last 6 weeks of progressive horror. If you come across them, heed my story as a warning. Nightly terrors can be more than illusions. They can be an open door through which something crosses into our world, weaving the line between dream and reality into a single, unbroken thread.